In this video, we're going to be looking at the shape tool specifically and how it behaves and functions within Illustrator and the different permutations of shape that you can use. So, I already talked a little bit in a previous video about the fundamental elements within Illustrator, which are fill and stroke. And I'm going to be alluding to that multiple times, so if you want to revisit kind of the very basic interface elements, look at the previous video that's labeled as basic interface. Over here on the left side, I have an arrangement of tools. Now up here at the top is the selection tool, which that's kind of your default position. You use that to move shapes around, to scale them, etc. But I've already highlighted here the rectangle tool, which is beneath. So if I click and hold on that, you can see that there's quite a few different options underneath it that you can use. There's the rectangle, rounded rectangle, ellipse, polygon, star, and flare. We're going to look at all of those with the exception of flare, which most of the time when you try and open it, it crashes the software. It's a little bit buggy, but mostly I think it just overwhelms the graphics processor of my particular computer. It's not hugely useful anyway. I've already talked about it too much. So the rectangle tool is the very first and most basic of these. And again, if you remember, there's fill and stroke at the top. Both of those deal with the concept of what a path is. So everything that you build in Illustrator is, being that it's a vector software, is plotting a line between 2 points. It plots a line between 2 points. So at its most fundamental element, you have a path, which is that line that's created between 2 points. If these are joined together, multiple lines, then you get a shape. And that shape then can be attributed to, or you can attribute fills and strokes to that path that creates the overall shape. As an example, right now mine is set to no fill and it has a black stroke. Again, a fill occupies the area between the lines, and then the stroke actually runs along the path itself. So if I make that heavier so that you can see it using the points here, you can see blue outline and then of course the fill in between. Now if I remove the stroke here, make sure I have that selected, remove the stroke using the little white box with the red stripe through it. And then I zoom in, you can see this little blue line that runs along the outer edge. This is showing me the outer boundary of the shape. So again, inside of that path is the fill. If I remove the fill and then I put the stroke back on, and I'll give it a good enough weight that you can actually see, you'll see that that line, that path line, actually runs through the stroke. So one of the fundamental ways to tell the difference between what you're looking at, because it can get more complicated as you go forward, between what is a fill and what is a stroke, is with a stroke you can see the path line running through the middle of your shape. Whereas if you're using a fill, that blue line would be the outer boundary. And of course the line color changes depending on the layer that you're using, but that is the boundary, that's the actual path that you're working with. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that. Let's look at something a little bit more complicated that works in a similar fashion to the rectangle. So you can create rectangles, ovals, etc. of all these different sizes just by clicking and dragging them out. It's very easy to do. And in fact, I can even take the selection tool, drag a selection over all of these, and then affect whether they have fill or stroke collectively. So I've got all these ovals now that have these shared qualities, so I can click and drag selections over them, or I can select them individually and make changes to them. It's pretty intuitive. It's very straightforward. So I can also click and drag over these and delete them just by hitting delete on the keyboard. Now, one of the next important things to understand is how to create perfect circles, perfect squares, rather than just ovals and rectangles. I could try and create a perfect circle, and it'll even help me here with the guidelines, kind of showing me the plus sign as long as I've got a perfect circle going. But if I hold shift, it will actually just maintain a perfect circle. So if you're wanting a perfect square, perfect circle, correctly aligned rectangle, or triangle or something like that, just hold shift and that allows you to have, it maintains the proportions. If I just let go of it, then I can create an oval of just about any size. So now let's say I've created the shape and I'm wanting to resize it. Well, automatically it shows you the bounding box around the edges, and if I go up to the corner, then I'll find that I can resize, but also I have the potential to warp the existing shape that I've made. I can basically convert it to an oval. If I want it to maintain the same proportion, hold Shift. Shift is the thing that's going to keep your shapes correct. Whenever you're resizing an image or you're resizing text or you're resizing a shape, unless you want it to get warped, hold Shift when resizing it. So I'll delete that one. One of the interesting shapes that we work with is the Polygon tool. And the star tool actually works very much the same. So if I click and drag out, you can see it starts me with a hexagon. Now, if I want to change the number of sides, while I'm just sitting here holding it, I have not yet released the cursor, I can just use the arrow keys on the keyboard to increase or decrease the number of sides that the shape has. And then if I wanted to flatten it out here, just hold Shift and I've got myself a triangle completely flattened out. So that's the basics of the Polygon tool. Another rather complicated one is the rounded rectangle tool. Now, if I click and drag this one out, you'll see that it looks very much like a rectangle, but it has that key geometric element, the rounded edge, the rounded corner. And I'm also able to change those using the parameters at the top here. There's actually a radius for those, which is going to be put in the unit denomination that I chose when I set up the canvas, which in this case was pixels. And then I can sit there and I can increase that, or I can decrease it very easily. But it's important to know that that's there, that you have that kind of manual control over the shape that you're using. One other thing to mention is that when it comes to moving shapes, it's literally just click and drag. That part's fairly easy to remember. Rotating often creates a little bit of confusion. I find this a lot with students because what you have to do is settle the cursor outside the corner of your shape. And you'll see it convert to this little cursor with the two arrows bending around one another. And if you go and actually make contact with or get too close to the corner, it changes to a scale option. So it hovers around this outside edge. Once you get used to it, you never think about it again, but if you're trying to rotate for the first time, it can actually be a little confusing. So if I click that and I start rotating, you'll see that it throws up the number of degrees that I'm rotating. It makes that visible. If I'm trying to get something precise, that's really useful, but it also is not necessarily the most efficient if I'm just trying to rotate something to be perfectly diagonal. If I just want to rotate it 90 degrees or 180 degrees or whatever it is, this is where we go back to Shift. If I hold Shift, it then rotates in increments, making it really easy to get a clean rotation at 90-degree increments. I'll go ahead and delete that one out. Again, the very last one that I would even bother to show is the star. It behaves very much like the Polygon tool as far as using the arrow keys to increase or decrease the number of sides. Probably not something that will come up a lot, but useful to have just in case you want it. And you can use it to create triangles.